I'm sure it is of no surprise to anyone that this final DLC for Battlefield 1 was a tad bit lackluster or dull to say the least. Apocalypse was supposed to be the farewell DLC for this game, leaving us to play and keep us entertained until the launch of Battlefield 2018. And it's bright as day that this DLC just fell flat on its face. From the feedback on the CTE to the release day, there's still some glaring issues that still need to be taken care of. So today, we're taking a look at the DLC's faults, what went wrong, why things are missing, and what they can do to remedy the situation at hand. This video isn't an attempt to belittle the developers at all, as I feel most of the issues that occurred were problems that were most likely out of their control. The biggest gripe about this DLC was the overall lack of content, and also the quality of the content. Compared to the first two expansion packs, Apocalypse is by far the least content packed, which is something you don't really want to sacrifice in a final DLC. This was supposed to be the icing on the cake, but instead turned out to be nothing more than a poor attempt at that. To reiterate, Apocalypse comes to us with 3 infantry maps and 2 air assault maps, which are more or less carbon copies of the campaign. Having 2 whole maps dedicated to an air assault game mode already blocks out a majority of the player base, leaving many to play with just a meager 3 maps. While we're on the topic of maps within the DLC, I just want to touch on the balance of the maps and game modes. 2 of the new maps, both Somme and Caporetto, boast the Conquest Assault game mode. Unlike previous Conquest Assault maps like Cape Hells, Heligoland, Albion, and the such, they give you lots of room and opportunity to flank your enemy, but this is non-existent on both Somme and Caporetto. Caporetto, for example, funnels 32 players down a long hill with no room to flank as infantry. The provided rocks as cover do a decent job of guarding you, but in the end you pretty much end up pinned at your spawn for around the first half of the match. Planes are your only real way to flank, and if the defenders have good pilots or competent defenders, those planes go down rather quickly. Now, I don't think the spawn trapping that occurs is due to the maps themselves. I believe it's more of the game mode of Conquest Assault. All defenders will spawn on the closest objective to the enemy spawn, and this basically creates a 64-man meat grinder over one objective, with no room to flank or try to catch the enemy surprised on foot. This leads to repetitive, uninteresting, and flat-out boring experience. The Somme experiences this as well, but is even worse when you factor things in like the lack of planes to quickly drop you off across the map. The Somme is also much more flat, with far less cover than Caporetto in the attacker spawn. All I have to say is that who honestly greenlit this? I'm sure that both internal and public testing, these issues were extremely apparent. A fix that I would suggest, and have been saying since the DLC's debut on the CTE, is to remove Conquest Assault entirely from these maps. Nothing is more frustrating than joining a game and find out you are essentially trapped at your spawn for quite a bit of the match. But this does raise some concerns on a map like Caporetto, especially regarding the height advantage for the Austro-Hungarians and the positions of the Livens projectors. So in terms of balancing on regular conquests, this does raise some issues with this potential fix. Time for the real disappointing factor for a lot of players, and that is the lack of a new operation and faction for this DLC. Thanks to Andrew Galata on the official reveal stream for this DLC, he provided some insight as to why there was no new operation. They just didn't have enough time on their hands, and that there was no maps currently in the DLC that linked up historically, which is pretty much the backbone of the entire Operations game mode. As for a new faction, I assume it fell under the same issue of simply not having enough time. Creating character models, voice acting, and the such take up a lot of valuable time, where those resources could be better spent on other aspects of the DLC or in the development of the next game. It's honestly disappointing to see, as many expected the Canadians to make an appearance, especially with the introduction of both the Ross rifle and the Passchendaele map. Another topic that I'd like to briefly touch up on is the quality of the DLC as a whole. It almost feels like no one decided to properly test the build before putting it out to the public. One of the glaring issues that I had was the Howl sniper still using the Farquhar Hill placeholder audio from the CTE. To me, for such a big studio, a little thing like this, while trivial, doesn't really leave a good impression for me. It really tells me, hey, we had to get this out last minute, and perhaps some things were just simply overlooked. Time for the big bombshell here, and that is the stuttering issue caused by the introduction of the new assignments with this DLC. There's a lot of background tracking for multiple missions, assignments, and challenges, and this addition was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I have no idea how such an issue went unnoticed by the quality assurance team or whoever handles the builds before releasing them out to the public. I'm going to assume the same with my previous grievance that I had with the Howl and blame it simply on time. Good news though, thanks to Jeff Braddock and Julian, a fix is expected to come this week, and by the time this video is up, it may have already been fixed, so fingers crossed. For more information, the issue is client side, so a server update is simply not enough. Depending on how many assignments a user has unlocked, it can increase the severity of the stuttering. And with consoles and their limited hardware, the stuttering makes the game borderline unplayable for most users. This is the biggest fault of the DLC, but it's something that is fixable, so in the long run, this is just a little blight that caused a lot of backlash. So this entire video, I've been spouting out developers don't have enough time, blah blah blah, and in fact, it's true. The studio outright admitted that there was a lack of time and some things had to be sacrificed in order to make it to the release window of Q1 2018. Back when the DLC was first teased, telling us the time frame it would be released, players expected the DLC to come then, no exceptions. Roll up to now, and if the DLC was delayed, I'm sure lots of players would have been angry. Some of you actually wanted the DLC to be delayed, and I'm in the same boat as well, but sometimes these things are just hard to come by. If we had anyone to blame in this situation, I'd point my fingers at EA, the publisher of these games, rather than the stellar developers at DICE. Things like this from the higher ups are most likely not to be questioned, and individual developers and community managers don't have control over this stuff, so blaming the expansion's lack of content and quality on the developers is just silly in my opinion. At the end of the day, despite the internal problems that led to this DLC's downfall, it definitely did not sit well with me and a lot of players. It was a disappointment, and for something as important as the last DLC for a game this big, this doesn't really lead players to continue playing Battlefield 1 until the next title comes along. It's unfortunate that things like this happen, especially this late into the game. So that about wraps up today's little quote-unquote rant video. If you couldn't tell already, this video was a bit of an experiment. Let me know your feedback on the structure, visuals, and the video as a whole down in the comment section below. And as always, it's been BloodHound, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.